Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. My name is Martin Quibell, and this time I am speaking with Brandon Montgomery about Brewstilled. Hey, Brandon, thanks for speaking today.
Thank you for having me, Martin. Thank you so much.
Do you want me to call you Brandon or Monty or what?
Brandon's fine. Yeah.
Brandon's fine. Okay.
Yep.
Because I know in the show sometimes you've said Monty and then...
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was my first. I went by Monty Ale for a while. So I just go by my first name, Brandon. That's when I was getting used to podcasting, get adjusted to the process, and going by DJ Monty Ale for a while. And I thought I'd just go with Brandon. Yeah.
That's cool. Cool. So do you remember then? So let's before I go into this. So
sure.
Your show then, Brewstilled, you watch a film or a television show and you're talking about that. And then you pick an alcoholic drink, or sometimes non-alcoholic drink, that matches with the viewing.
Yeah, so something I started off with TV shows and pairing beers that go to shows I was watching. I started talking about Marvel shows when I first started a podcast. And I was trying to find what fits with the show and the beer pairing that goes with it. I really love that process. I still do that now with what I'm talking about. Now I'm talking about Severance from Apple TV's my current show, which I've been pairing that with like tea. Lately, and introducing more non-alcoholic beverages during the podcast. But I first started out, I was doing like beer pairings with the shows I talked about and the topics I talk about. Just having that pairing to go with it, because when you go to a bar, tap room, you talk about a lot of topics. You think about what am I drinking at the same time. So that's where I really start out as talking about TV shows and the beers that go with those.
Yeah, because the first episode about Severance, was it an herbal tea or a lemon tea that you suggested?
Yes, lavender tea. Yes, I remember the first season of Severance, there was a mention of lavender tea. So I thought, let's pair that with the first episode of Severance for season 2. You get lavender tea. So that's more like a tea show. Because talking about, I did Dry January back last month, like no alcohol. So I thought, let's do some tea for Severance, and eventually start bringing in more beer back into the podcast. But, I started just trying out different beverages as well, trying to more like beverages that are brewed and not just beer, but also I'll talk about coffee eventually. Right now, but talk more about tea. But now I'm just recently did an episode where I do a beer pairing for the Super Bowl. And that was something that I did this recently. And so trying to find the right beer pairings or beverage pairings to go with the shows I talk about.
So when you do those pairings, then what are you looking at? How do you match the content with the actual choice of drink?
A lot of times go with the name of the beer or the subject matter of the show. Like, for example, I once did episodes about alternate realities in the NFL. So I was looking for beers that have an outer space reference to it. When I was talking about For All Mankind from Apple TV, I looked for beers that had the same element, scientific feel to it, like a science reference to it. One beer had an astronaut on the beer bottle. So trying to find the names of the beers come into play into that. And also for the beer style could also play a role into that. But trying to find, like the title of the beer does play a big role in that process. For example, I did ghost stories where I call barrel-aged ghost stories, where I find a barrel-aged beer because the ghost story is over 30 years old. I look for a beer that's bourbon barrel-aged. And also when I did like barrel-aged mysteries, which I'm working on a new set of those right now, I look for a barrel-aged beer. A beer that's older in terms of barrel age to go with an older mystery. So try to find a compare and contrast of the episodes, the topics, and also trying to find a beer based on the title of the beer that kind of can go with that. It's not always easy. It takes a lot of beer shopping, trying to find the right beer. And so sometimes it kind of gets a little complicated sometimes too. Like when I'm shopping for beer, I'm looking for what can this go with and the topic I'm talking about and what beer I can pair that with. It's not always easy, but also a very fun experience along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because you're sort of doing in a way you're reviewing the TV show or
Yes.
the film, and you're also doing a review in a way of the actual beverage as well.
Yeah, and I like doing that because right now I'm studying. I like to study beer. You know where beer comes from. There's so many beer styles out there, so I try to do like the taste notes for the beer, looking for something that's unique about it. Now, some beer styles are about the same, especially the IPAs. So I try to find something that's unique that's out there in the beer world. Right now, I'm looking for more different beer varieties to explore, but also want to educate the listener about that beer and get some information about the brewery as well.
So it's a bit like, and you're probably going to laugh at this, maybe.
Oh no, sorry.
It's a bit like if you're watching was it B Story or something, that film? Would you have like a Tennessee honey Jack Daniels or honeyed Jim Beam?
That could be one. That could be one. I've never had too much. I haven't had Jack Daniels on a podcast before, but that could also be one to explore. Find what pairs of Jack Daniels and what pairs of the bourbons that are out there. That could just find what explores with bourbon. That would be something I like to do down the road. I don't talk about too much bourbon on the podcast, but that is something that another beverage I would like to see what goes with those and how to compare and contrast the topic with that particular beverage style.
Yeah, unless it's something honey based that's
Mhm.
like an ale. I don't
Yeah.
know whether
Mhm.
there is or not.
Mhm. Yeah, that could be like a. I was in a podcast one time where, like, there was like a Made for Love, which about a couple was having a conflict, and I found a beer called Peace and Love. So I think just find some peace and love and conflict. I remember finding that beer from Dust Bowl Brewing Company down in Turlock out here in California. So trying to find the title of the beer went with the subject matter of the show, conflict and romance, but also find there should be some peace and love along the way.
So do you remember what your first experience with drink was?
It was back in 2014. No, back in 2013 actually. When I moved out to California. I wasn't too much of a beer drinker, and I was living with people in Davis, California. We went to a bar one night, City Hall Tavern, and I liked the beer I had there. I don't remember. I think it was a wheat beer. And then the following Saturday, we're all inside the house we were living at. I thought Saturday night, are they going to do anything? They said no. So I went back to that same bar, and I became a regular there. And that's where my craft beer journey began, exploring the world of beer. And I was just turned about 30 years old at the time, so I wasn't a beer drinker in college. Never thought myself being a beer drinker. It just took the right beer and the right bar to make it happen to begin that craft beer journey and also exploring other beer styles as well. And it became a regular there. I would drink it every Saturday night, learned about different beer styles. Particularly, I started off in the IPAs. And since then, exploring like stouts, porters, lagers, and also the barrel aged beers that are more like barrel aged stouts, barley wines. That it was for me, it's been a learning process for the past about 10 years actually. And I'm still learning actually. There's so many beers out there that I continue to find. But we all started on that one Saturday night with an IPA and how I branched out from that since then.
Anything can affect the taste and
Oh yeah.
everything to do with the drink.
Mhm.
Down to, it's quite well known that with some spirits and other drinks, that if you sort of like have them in, or you distill drinks in
Mhm.
in like a keg that's a certain type of wood, and it's had another drink in there beforehand or something,
Mhm.
like a brandy's been there, and then you'll put another like ale in there.
Mhm.
It will have a hint of that brandy will come through in the taste of the ale and things like
Mhm.
this.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Barrel aged beers had that effect too. There's barrel aged barley wines, barrel aged porters, stouts, and there's also barrel aged lagers out there. And just seeing how the wood and barrel impacts the flavor for a beer that's normally not barrel aged.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So matching drinks and film with TV.
Mhm.
Is this something that you were doing before you started the show, or were you thinking,
Not really. I always wanted to do a podcast. I started a podcast back in March of 2021 about after the pandemic, where during the pandemic I was photographing all the unrest that happened during the pandemic, and I realized, this is not going to last forever. I wanted to do a podcast for quite some time. So after the January 2021, I got down into researching it, what a podcast is. I've already knew what they were actually, but trying how to get one started and just reach out to fellow podcasters for advice. Got great advice from them and just realized what kind of show I wanted to do. And I always want to do like a beer show. And I thought just do a beer show where I talk about TV shows and just still doing TV shows now, but also talking about the NFL season. And just it's been evolving since then, where I'm now talking about life topics as well, like more of a variety show, but still having that TV show recap element as well at the same time, but also adapting as it goes, while also having the beer pairings on there, exploring other beverages now, and just seeing where things are going.
Yeah, so you've got that format there, and you've explained the history of podcast history.
Mhm.
So have you mixed up the actual formula over that time? Because I've listened to episodes beginning, middle, and recent-ish episodes as well. So I don't know whether during that you've had any offshoots. You've had guests, for instance, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I do guest interviews. A lot of them from the beer industry, talk to guys from breweries that come on, and also talk with those, so in the psychology field about life topics. And my first guest interview was with Kevin Bryant, who wrote Spies on the Sidelines about espionage in the world of football. And that was a great interview, having authors come on, but also talk with those from the beer industry as well, to talk about their brewery, the beers they make, and also about the state of the beer industry, which right now is facing a lot of challenges. The beer industry right now, there's breweries are closing down. And the economy is also challenging breweries as well. So learn about how they got into brewing, the beers they make, and also where things are going in the beer industry and how they navigate the challenges the industry is currently facing.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Not just because of the problems that the lockdowns caused for a lot of bars and places. That caused a lot of problems as it was, but also you've got the rising cost of the actual what you make the beers with and the alcohol with.
Yeah, and I like hearing that from them as well, how they navigate those challenges, and also talking about the beers they make, but also knowing that what the consumer wants in a beer, because a lot of brewers, there are other beer styles they would want to make, but you also know the consumers want something different from that. So learn how they navigate that part of the industry in terms of knowing what the consumer wants with the beer style, also knowing there's something else they'd want to do. And that's understandable because IPAs right now dominate the beer market. I go to beer festivals and there's so many IPAs there because that's what the consumers want. But there's other beer styles out there that would like to see more of a representation in tap menus. But unfortunately, the consumer base just isn't there in a large number. And there's like talking with brewers about that. In a couple of weeks, it'll be SF Beer Week in San Francisco. So I'll be going to that in a couple of weeks, just seeing what beer styles will be made in San Francisco, which is more of an eclectic city for beer, more different tastes out there, more different beer varieties, because that clientele is there. And I'll be just want to do a follow-up on that as well here in the podcast. And you'll talk to some brewers about that in terms of what Beer Week was for them this year, and also where things are right now in the year 2025 as the beer industry continues to face more challenges as time goes on. It's like a ongoing journey, an ongoing storyline as it all unfolds, and it's fun talking about that on the podcast.
It is, but it's also interesting as well from what you've just said.
Yeah.
That these manufacturers, the people that are making the beer and distributing the beers, are essentially doing what other alcohols like spirit producers were doing before, because that's why you've got all these different types of bourbon and different types of vodkas that are out there. And it's because they've gone out there and they've seen what the public are doing. Essentially with those, it's people who mix drinks. And they're looking and saying, right, what do they mix this bourbon with? What do they mix this with? Oh, perhaps we can actually go into that market and sell drinks that are specially tailored towards that. And now the ale and the beer distributors are doing exactly the same thing and seeing what the actual punters are after.
Yeah, it's like seeing how the industry does adapt too. Because also, speaking of spirits, the relationship between beer and spirits is a good one I like to explore that way. Pairing beer with a spirit, like a beer and a bourbon, a beer and a whiskey, that's also something I like looking at as well. You know, I go to Whiskey Fest. I know went there for the past 3 years in San Francisco when they had it in San Francisco. Just learn to see about how the different spirits that are out there. There's the whiskey, the bourbon, the scotch, and also the different distilleries that go to these events, and to seeing how that does connect to the beer industry, and how they handle different audience, obviously at whiskey events, but also showing that there's still a connection to them and the beer industry, and also know how breweries and distilleries collaborate for different beer styles.
Yeah, and how like other companies like sticking with the whiskey just for a slight tangent, sticking with that. It's interesting to see how companies who do blended whiskies, how they choose the blends that they actually pick. So if you have 5 blends, why do they pick those 5 blends specifically to mix together to make that blended whiskey, and makes it all different is really interesting.
Right. It is. Back in November, I went to Jackrabbit Brewing, who has a barrel-aged program. They had 4 or 5 different beer selections here in whiskey barrels. And Bar Sound Bourbon did a presentation there for the River City Whiskey Society, a whiskey club here in Sacramento. But 4 or 5 different beers with their own blend of whiskey influence in the barrel, like 5 different beers, but also each having their own whiskey influence for different flavors, stronger or a little more not as strong as the other, but 4 to 5 different unique flavors that I remember. And all in the bottle too. I bought 2 of the bottles, and just seeing how those stouts and those barley wines all had their own personality with the flavor, with their own unique whiskey blend that really paired well, that really matched well for a unique set of different beer styles.
Yep. So you've got your knowledge of the drink, and you're very much into going into these different festivals and things to be able to try all these drinks and get all the behind the scenes of it. If you've got that, you're also a fan of television shows that you're watching and these things. So you've got all that in place. You've got the history with the podcast. So coming to start the podcast then, how did that come about? Did you come up with a structure for it? And was it scripted, and is it scripted in any way?
For each episode's different. Most of the time it's not scripted. Some episodes are scripted. When I do a ghost story episode, those are scripted. When I talk about mysteries, those are scripted. For the most part, though, I say 80% is more not scripted. I can just kind of speak freely about the topics I talk about. And so that's for the most part is a non-scripted podcast. Some topics do require a script. So that requires more research, writing the script, the fact-checking, and also just making sure it's all good to get over before I read it out. Because reading the script sometimes is a little different sometimes, because I don't do it very often on the podcast. So that requires a little more time, a little more research, and it's making sure the topic's all squared away. And it's a good process, though. But I see for the most part, I'm a non-scripted podcast, and it's kind of just speaking about whatever the show I'm talking about. But overall, mostly not scripted, unless the topic does require a script.
So if you watched a television program and you're going to give your opinion of that program, I'm guessing that all you would do is you'd watch the program and then just take some notes if anything jumps out at you. And you'll just have like little bullet points like we've got here.
Right. Yeah, I do.
Out description, but like bullet points and go, oh, this, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, usually when I talk about a show, I watch a show at least 3 times. I'll watch it once, watch it for the first time, the second time, taking some notes, and for the third time, just taking more detailed notes. So that's usually I usually watch it 3 times before I have to recap it to make sure I don't miss anything, because some shows require a lot of observation, like Severance is one of those shows. You got to look at what's the background of the characters, look for any key moments, and that requires a lot of note-taking for the second time and also for the third time, and more of a bullet points, and I categorize it based on moments from the episode, based on the story arcs, and then that's when I start describing on the podcast, using the bullet points as a guideline to recap the episode.
Yeah, I mean the Marvel shows that you've done.
Yes.
Pay attention to those 2 things that go in the background. Because you'll mention things and you'll say this happened, but if you just watch the thing once, you might miss something in the background happening that's important later on.
Exactly, yeah, because Marvel has a lot of Marvel shows have those Easter eggs, like things that connect to other shows those are really hard to spot sometimes, depend on the Marvel knowledge. So those require a lot of, and I try to give theories on what's going to happen next in the next episode. Try to give predictions and just suddenly characters' motivations. But also, usually when I recap a show, towards the end of the episode, to give them my observations and questions, where I talk about things that stood out that might come back later in the season or in the series, and also doing out questions about what might happen next in the episode. And sometimes I give a prediction. It may not happen, but try and throw out a prediction there on what can happen next in the show going forward based on what happened in that particular episode.
Yeah. One of the most obvious Easter eggs in a Marvel show would be Miss Marvel, where they had the X-Men cartoon theme suddenly play in the background, just quietly in the background at one specific moment in one of the episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's seen the connections, like how they're going to build on that, how that relates to the show. But also, I think when I see things like that, it's showing that it introduces new characters to the Marvel franchise in their own creative way.
Yeah, but it's also a hint in a sense, because it's almost like a foreshadowing of, this will lead to something else. And
exactly,
they'll always do that. They'll always foreshadow something. Mm-hmm. So how did you set about recording and editing it then? How did you learn how to do that, and how do you do that?
I had some experience editing before, so I went and got Adobe Audition and just kind of like watching YouTube videos, how to get a refresher on it, and just learn as I go. That's kind of what it was, learn as I go. Editing, it gets better over time, and I learn more tricks in Adobe Audition, how to improve audio quality. So there's kind of like YouTube has like good resources for that I took advantage of. I was watching how to watch editing videos, learn about how it goes, just learn about the process, but there's kind of like a good way to learn is off YouTube and the proper editing techniques.
Yeah. And then you've got the sound, the music for the show as well.
Yeah. Just find stock music online. Let's go into it takes a few hours. Finding the right song, just demoing it. That is quite a process. It can take maybe a partial afternoon, but that there's also take some time because you got to find the right song I have one song primarily. But for the ghost stories, I had to find like a spooky song to play in the background. And that took some time finding the right song. But you don't just find stock music online, because sometimes music is a big deal in podcasts. You want to make sure you find something that's authorized to use. And that's where stock music comes in. And that's another time consuming process as well, because you want to make sure you have the right song that goes with the episode.
Yep. And the title is a difficult thing to come up with as well. That can sometimes take time.
Yes, I use the word generator to come with mine, because the term Brewstilled is a combination of brew and distilled into one word. It's supposed to reflect a philosophy of calmness and peace, just to relax over your favorite beverage, over what you're doing. So this could be like a chill philosophy, and that's where the term Brewstilled comes from. And I did through a word generator. It's fine that the podcast name, that took quite a while. I went through different names, but I settled on Brewstilled because I like the combination of those two words.
Yeah, and also it works with the calm as well, the calmness, because it's a show that you are, I know this isn't seen as offensive, but it's comfortable. It's not like one of those shows where you'll have a show that's about alcohol, and you'll have these people who are, dare we say, they've probably had too many of them.
Yeah.
Almost boisterous, but you're sort of comfortable with it, and it's more of this is a drink you can sit down and relax to while you're watching what you're going to watch.
Yeah, that's exactly. So what my podcast is more about being just relaxing, being calm, whatever you're watching, TV show, football, or watching a movie. It's just be relaxed over your favorite beverage. And that's what I want the show to be, positive experience too, not to be negative about. I talk about football teams a lot. I don't try to criticize teams. I like to keep it positive because we all have our own favorite team. That I like to keep it more neutral and also more relaxed. And just keep it calm. Just sit back, relax, have a beer, and just enjoy life.
Absolutely. Yep. And then the show logo as well, the Brewstilled on it.
Yeah. That was my current logo is my third logo. I generated using I did some AI generation on it but I need a new logo because logos are also a hassle in podcasting. It could be like you would have the right logo with your name title on there. So I settled on that one. I had that one for I generated that back in the summer, and I thought I need a logo change. And I found that one and I've been using it since then. I think that'd be my permanent logo going forward. But logos are another thing in podcasting. You want to make sure you got, it's like the title. You just say, it's like another thing you really got to put a lot of effort into. You got to have different candidates. You got to look at the right one before making the right decision.
Yeah, I know that from listening to and chatting with people like Ariel Nissenblatt and James and all these people from Pod News and Sounds Profitable. I've spoken with these people and they all say that it's a weird thing because the logo has to reflect what your show is
right
away. So that's why mine is supposed to be like peas in like a pod, but it's a microphone stand and they've got headphones on. So they're obviously talking to each other, and it sort of works and tells people sort of what it is. Like yours will have alcohol and people will know that it's about that, and the television and all this. And it's a very difficult thing to come up with. It's just as difficult to come up with the music and with the title, and all of it is just a minefield.
Yeah, it is. It is, but I advise a podcasters, like, try not to overthink the logo too. And don't be afraid to change it too. Sometimes things need to change. I see a lot of podcasters change the logos every now and then, and sometimes that is necessary.
Yeah, sometimes mix things up.
Yeah,
but then again, we do that when we change the format of slightly as well. We mix it up to make it more interesting for us as creatives as well, I think, sometimes.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So, and logo, so is an interesting one, I think. So going on a tangent then, in a sort of like a subject that I've chosen for this episode, maybe, would be podcast shows that you might listen to and what you would pair those shows with. So throwing you in at the deep end here, basically.
Yeah.
So are there any shows that you listen to and you think, oh, this would be a good drink pairing for that show?
I listen to a lot of sporting. I listen to like different wide variety podcasts. There's one called Search Engine, which is a really good one, a variety show to talk about all kinds of topics. It's like, it pretty much what it is that podcast is based about whatever people type into a search engine. There's always a different topic on there. So for that one, I think that would be more for a lager, like a sessionable beer. Because I think that's like more of a sessionable beer kind of podcast, like a lager or pilsner, low ABV. And then I listen to a lot of mystery podcasts. I talk about unsolved mysteries. I think that there's kind of like a porter or a stout, like a darker beer, because it may be there for a while. And you want a beer that's a little more, that's going to be more rich, more higher ABV, like more of a potent beer. I mean, not necessarily potent, but more like a darker beer, like a porter or a stout. I think those are good for like mystery style podcast. And I should listen to a lot of sporting podcasts as well. That'd be like another, like sessionable beer, like a lager, pilsner, similar to the search engine. And for IPAs, what I pair with IPA with, I think that it'd also be like another one, maybe like sporting events, who knows? I mean, like, I think sporting events can be like more broad and the beers that go with that. IPA, sessionable beers. That's a really good question. I like that question. But mysteries. Going back to that one, just stouts and porters, but there's I think that's how I'll go with it now.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I don't know. I like to, if I wasn't listening in the van driving, because I do all my listening in a van driving, so I can't drink alcoholic beverage.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But if I was listening in my own time to something like Bad Counsel, where there's people that just talk about and they get sent in questions by listeners and they're a bit risque with the questions, I might just enjoy a nice bourbon with that because it's just comfortable for that sort of discussion. And as it gets rowdy, the sort of bourbon almost makes you join in some ways as well. If you don't, I'm trying to think now off the top of my head because I haven't thought about this at all. And I thought, I'm going to have to come up with something.
Yeah, it's a good question because you never know. Each podcast has their own personality. Like every beverage has their own style and pairing to go with it. It's like pairing beer with food. You got to find you got to make sure flavors offset one another.
Yeah, I mean the writing in the audio dramas of somebody like Lauren Shippen, I can't think of what I'd match with something like Bright Sessions, if you know what that show is, or these shows. I wouldn't know what to match with some of those audio dramas.
Yeah, I don't know. I think like maybe that could be. I keep thinking maybe like a darker beer for those. I don't know why, darker beer because if you're just gonna have one beer, maybe like a darker beer, one that could last a while, one you sip as you go. I think that would be a good pairing because a stout and a porter, especially a barrel aged one, you don't want to sip. You want to drink it too fast. So I think it's something that people like a lot of longevity to it in terms of you're gonna be sitting there for a while. I think that would be a good one, a darker beer.
I'm now thinking of sitting down listening to that with a Guinness.
Guinness would be a good example too. Yes, yeah.
If I go into a pub, that's my choice of beer. If I have a beer.
That is, it's one of mine too. I go to pub, Guinness or Smithwick's, but Guinness is one that's everyone loves Guinness. It's one that just it's stood the test of time. It's must have for any pub or any tap room.
And like you said, I like the fact that with that, I'm somebody that will savor the drink as well. It's not a drink that you drink quickly. I don't think a stout. It's a stout that it lasts. You let it continue to breathe, and you enjoy
exactly
the relaxation of not having to rush this drink. Essentially, just get used to it. Just there enjoying it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So, crikey, we've been really quick with all these questions here. So, what? So yeah, if people were sort of like looking in a television guide, what are pointers then that people would you'd look for if you were getting ready to watch something in a television guide? So what with the drink would you be looking for in a description for a show to do the matching with?
In terms of the show, like what would I look for?
Yeah, you know how they describe a show in a television guide? You'll have a look at it and it'll go, oh, blah, blah, blah. So if it's go back to the days of Dallas, JR kills such and such, and this happens, and then you got Miss Ellie and all these things. So it's just a description. What would you be looking for as a descriptive to base these matchings on?
I would look for based on the subject. I would look for the subject matter of the show. Is it a mystery? Is it a drama? I would look at that first. I would just find what would I pair that with. A lot of times too, it really depends on. It goes based on the episode too. Each episode could be different. Back when I talked about a show, back when I first started a podcast called Made for Love from HBO Max, when that was around, that was a lot of IP. I remember doing a lot of IPAs on that one, and that's like more of an IPA show. So it could just depend on the type of show it is. Like, what is the storyline? What is the subject matter of that show? So I would look for that in terms of decide what kind of beer I would pair with that. I think a lot comes out of what kind of show it is.
Yeah, because the reason why I've sort of asked that, not quite again, but in a different way, is I'm trying to get an idea from you as, in a way, I'm just suggesting to people that I think it's a good idea to almost make an event sometimes out of these times. So if you get very little time with yourself and whoever you are with, for instance, your other half, and you're going to sit down and watch this thing together, I think it might be interesting to suggest to people and say, you could make it an event by going out and getting a drink to match what you're going to view in a way, and make it something special for just you and your other half or whoever, the family, to enjoy that moment together. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think that'd be like finding, like, just looking at what kind of show it is. That's kind of what I go for. Like, Severance right now. That show takes place in the winter. So I thought that's like a darker beer kind of show. I've been talking about tea lately. I think about it, that takes place in the winter. That'd be more like a darker beer show. Stouts and porters that go like winter style beers. I think that would be, for Severance, that would be something I like to add more of as I get more beer back on the podcast. When I bring beer on the Severance, I think more like a darker beer kind of show, given it's a winter style, when it takes place in the winter season.
Yeah. So stout would fit with that perfectly.
Oh yeah, perfectly. Yes. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So what shows particularly, actually before that, we've got this. So what advice would you give to people if they were starting a podcast themselves?
I would just say, for them to do the podcast they want to do, have patience with the process. Don't be afraid to adapt as you go. Me, there's a thing called niche. I'm not really a big niche guy. I know some people say some guys need to get really niche with the podcast, and maybe that could be a good thing or a bad thing. I just say have fun with it and be patient and do the show that you want to do. And don't worry about, just keep going as you go, and don't be afraid to listen to other podcasts, and also reach out to other podcasters. It's a good community. And also one thing too, Noah, there used to be a podcast called Pairs with Life. John Tyler, a great podcaster that was on, he did say this. I'm glad he said this, because never speak negative about a fellow podcaster. Podcasting, it's a community. We all have our own podcasts. We'll have our own personalities, different shows. But I think it's like a community, and not to speak ill will one another, because it's not a good thing to do. But so for my advice for podcasters, just do the show that you want to do, have patience, but don't speak anything negative about a fellow podcaster, and just enjoy the journey, because it's what it is. It's a journey. You never know where it's going to take you. You meet new people along the way, and that's what my podcast has a lot of it has been, is meeting people and the experience that you have at the events I go to, the beer festivals, the shows that talk about. I can't say like it's going like the outer space. I talk about For All Mankind from Apple TV, about the alternate world, about the space race. I think podcasting is also like that. You're going to outer space. You're exploring life in your own way.
Yeah, but that's what makes it interesting, that the podcast network, or the whole of the podcasting life in a way, is because you can have this sort of like relationship where with most mainstream media, there's a competition going on.
Right.
We are all trying to get people to listen to us.
Right.
But it's a more friendly, it's not so competitive where we're not going to have anything to do with them.
I know.
We will suddenly appear on somebody else's show, almost talking about a similar subject, and their shows are about a similar subject, but there's a friendship there between us all, or it's a helpful community who, even if you make shows that are similar to each other, whereas in mainstream media they wouldn't help each other or in any way. In the podcasting world, it's different, because we're all there and we've got this community that has each other's backs.
Exactly. That's true, because it's a very supportive community. I never seen podcasts fight one another. It's not like you're missing mainstream media. There's always rivalries, all these negativity out there. Podcasting, I don't see that, and I like that. It's more positive. It's more supportive. And it's just a united community where a lot of us we're doing it from home. We're independent. We're not doing it for the money. We're doing it because we enjoy it. We like it. And we love having a connection with other podcasters and what we're all doing, because it's a passion that we're all following.
But it's also interesting that we've got the independents, like ourselves, doing the independent shows, and then to another degree, you have got almost mainstream there with things like the Smartlesses and the Joe Rogans and these people, and those shows, which I'm not putting them down. I'm saying that makes it more interesting, because I like to think of, if I was going to suggest to people what I suggest to people that they do with their podcast listening, me personally, I like a mix of the comfortable person that sat in their room or sat in a closet at home or somewhere. I like the comfortability of that, but sometimes I quite like some of the corporates, like the Smartlesses. I think they're really good. I like them a lot. That is the closest to mainstream radio that you get over there, and it's nice to have that mix of different types of media to widen and broaden your own personal enjoyment.
Exactly. Yeah. We also have our own creative freedom. I value that, because if you're with the mainstream media, you may not have final say what you want to do. Podcasts, we can talk about what we want to talk about. We have creative control. I value that. Just having a free form mentality where you can go on a podcast, talk about what you want to do without anyone telling you can't. It's the independence I value. It's something we all value as podcasters.
But that's what makes it more interesting in another way, is because we as podcasters, we get into that area where the mainstream radio doesn't, because mainstream radio are all about the audience and how big an audience they can get. Whereas we're after those little elements that are being missed by the mainstream. So you will find shows about these bands or about this specific television show that not many people were interested in, but you'll have all these listeners from across the world because they're not being catered to by the mainstream.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Just talking about the undiscovered topics, talking about things that the mainstream doesn't talk about. Exactly, yeah. So try to look at obscure topics that make it interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So what shows do you specifically like title-wise that are like favourites to you?
I really shows I talk about shows on the podcast, you mean?
Yeah. Podcasts that you listen to that you have to listen to, shows that are definite.
Oh, yes.
Necessities of your listening.
Oh, yeah. Search engine is one. I like hearing about. There's one called our conspiracy theories, which I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's fun hearing about them. Just hearing about the history, how they got together. And there's also one called Check the Mic, which talks about NFL football. That's one I always listen to because they got a good perspective on that. And there's also another two I like. Another one I like too is Inside NFL Daily, talk about the current NFL season, hearing about their perspective on that. And also Move the Sticks, another sport one I like to listen to. Those are ones I really like. I always want to listen to when they come on. The Athletic is another one. And just also discovering new podcasts, discovering new ones out there. There's always something out there to discover, but those are examples of ones I cannot miss. I do have on my schedule. Go Check the Mic. And also the GM Shuffle is another one I like to listen to, hearing from a sports executive and getting their perspective on the current NFL season. And those are examples of ones I do and how the passion have for their topics.
The latter one that you mentioned, the GM one, that's fascinating in a way because I've listened to a couple of those. I listen to everything. But I've listened to a couple of those and they're interesting because you get the inside of what's going on behind the scenes. So they will talk to these people and they'll say what they're thinking is about strategies that they're using with the teams. And it's interesting to hear what they're thinking behind this is when they're coming up with this sort of strategy.
Yeah, that's how getting the inside knowledge is really valuable because you're hearing a different side of the game we normally don't hear. And we're hearing from people who they're not on the field, but are the decision makers, and talk about what their experience is like when they were in the league and how it's relevant to today's NFL. That's another part about I like listening to as well. So now it comes on, I like checking that out, and that's one of the valuable ones I'd like to listen to in terms of a podcast.
Yeah, because personally, as somebody who loves Major League Baseball,
yes,
me personally, I love it when I get the chance to hear one of the coaches or somebody speak in more detail, where they get them in a long form interview, because you'll find some of them online. You'll find podcasts where they've talked to these people and they are just incredible to listen to. Everything, the step by step, and why they pick these people for the front, and why they've got these people for different games, and why they'll pick different players and change the team around according to what game they're playing. And that's just fascinating to hear out why they've come up with that, to me.
It is good. Yes, that is. Yeah.
So anyway, thanks for speaking with me today, Brandon. Where can people find you and get hold of you?
Oh, I'm available on every podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and also on iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. I'm on every podcast directory, and the name of the podcast is Brewstilled. And I have my tagline at the end of each episode. I say, be brewed and be distilled. It's just for listener to be relaxed. And I'm always have new content coming out. We're always evolving with different, talk about life topics, TV shows, and also talk about the NFL season, and just whatever comes to mind too, and always having those drink pairings, and also guest interviews from the beer industry, psychology field, and just whatever comes to mind, because it's just having that podcast mentality and just having a great time along the way.
Okay. And how can people get in touch with you, Brandon? Social media or?
I am on podcast. I am on Instagram at Brewstilled Podcast over on Instagram. I there have photos of the beers I talk about, and along with episode links in my Instagram stories. It's a great way to keep it up to date with the podcast is up to. and also beer festivals to go to.
That's cool. Right, you can find Pods Like Us on any streaming platform. We are on Instagram, Facebook, X, and Blue Sky, and you can find us on Patreon as well. And if you want to contact me, you can contact me through podslikeus@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.